I got into Bitcoin because I'm a class of 2020, just like Michael Saylor. And it was around that I had been, of course, I have a lot in common with guys like Larry Lepard and some others in the space who are older, guys like me. I'm 60. And I had invested fairly successfully all my life in the stock market. And then when we saw, I'm in Japan, and when we started to see the first inclination that the COVID pandemic was going to take place, and that was around January here because there was the Diamond Princess ship in Tokyo where the first cases really started to publicly develop. And then some friends and I at the office I have one other friend who's a libertarian and is a gold bug. I was a gold bug as well, but we were mainly in the stock market. We were looking at I didn't know at the time that I was looking to reduce my time preference. But we had invested successfully in the stock market and we had done pretty well. We were both in the Department of Defense, and we'll get into that later as to how that, I'm not too excited to admit that, but that's how I made my money. And we invested mainly in stocks. Around that time, we anticipated that there was going to be a drop off in the market. So I went and I switched into gold. And around 2019, maybe the later half of 2019, I had already read the Bitcoin Standard because a friend of mine was a libertarian and he was familiar with Hans Hermann Hoppe and Ludwig von Mises and Rothbard. And so after I read the Bitcoin Standard and I was already going down the road to putting my resources in a sounder money, Bitcoin instantly made sense to me because I was already dealing, when we look at what the stock market is, and I know you talk about this with a lot of guests, we're already dealing with a digital currency. I don't get paid in shekels. No one comes up to my house and brings me stacks of paper. I get digits in my inbox, in my bank every month. And when you think about how those digits get created, and I know you've talked about it ad nauseum, that there's no proof of work, it's just somebody sitting on a keyboard. I was intrigued by this notion that there is a system, there's a protocol that accounts for a custody chain throughout its inception to its delivery to you. And I knew nothing about how exchanges worked or how wallets worked, but I learned and I went through the first steps I did Coinbase and I think I had a Trezor at the beginning. But I put a little bit into Bitcoin and at the time, a little bit of ETH because that was everybody was talking about blockchain, right? You know it well. And, but, and again, I'm 60 now. I was, 56 at the time. It instantly appealed to me because it just made sense because nothing else made sense. And gold makes sense to me, but I'm sure you've talked about ad nauseum. There's all the problems associated with gold. So after getting into gold for a while, I took everything out and then mainly got back into Bitcoin after I sold out of the market in March of 2020.
Interesting. And I mean, we can get into everything, but first, when did you leave the USA? Was this already, were you still in America when this happened?
Oh, no. We have to talk about my life a little bit. So I enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1988, and I've basically been out of the state since then for the most part. So I spent 3 years in Europe, in Germany, went to the first Gulf War. And I spent 5 years in Korea, almost 20 years in Japan. So I've been outside the United States for the majority of the last 36 years.
Interesting. So, but from the U.S. military, so you were sent here or on your own?
Yeah, so I was in the U.S. military from 1988 to 2010, and I was in Korea at the time. And I retired. I entered, so I dropped out of. I was going to university, And we can talk about, how people get on their own journeys, like you were mentioning before. How old are you, Robin? Do you mind me asking?
Just 26.
26. Okay. So, as a 60-year-old, I can't even remember what happened when I was 20. So when I was 26, I would have been a lieutenant in the army in Germany. I probably would have been a first lieutenant. Would have been after I was in the first Gulf War, I think, when I was 24 or 25. And so the army was my life from 1988 to 2010. My wife's Japanese. We met in Japan around 1999, and then we got married, and then we've had kids. We were stationed in Korea together. I decided to get out of the army from Korea, and then I took a Department of Defense civilian job in Japan from 2010 till last year when I was kicked out.
And you said previously you were in the defense department and you weren't proud of it. Why that?
Well, no, it's just that, and this is, we may have some, uncomfortable discussions today about where we are in the Bitcoin journey. I think a lot of times I've been on a few podcasts, and like Robin, I think I have problems with terms like the Bitcoin community, because we are disparate people with different backgrounds, of different races and different belief systems, and there's and all those people got into this money, right? And of course, we could approach it a ton of different ways, and people could disagree with me. I just look at it, and I had listened to a excellent podcast the other day on Radio Rothbard between Ryan McMakin and Pierre Byland, who wrote an excellent book called How to Think About the Economy. And their discussion was, is gold and Bitcoin money? And so, because I'm older and I don't need any kind of philosophical accoutrements to the thing that I think is going to have a certain use, right? I don't have to me, Bitcoin doesn't have to be energy, or I know it's a protocol, but I'm 60. I have 20 years left on the planet. So whether it's an artist may look at it, or a musician may look at it a different way based on their background. An engineer may look at it. Michael Saylor looks at it differently because of his background, because he went to MIT. So he can describe it as energy, and I'm not going to refute that. It can be all these things. To me, it's money. and and when you're young or when you're older, as we go through life, we all have to figure out how we're going to make money, right? How we're going to gather the resources to live the type of life that we want to live. And so for me, when I'll start at 26, but I think I entered the Army at 24. I had left university because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I had no real positive outlook. And then I decided for some reason that I would just enlist in the Army, because that's just something that Americans do. And my friends thought I was crazy, because I was going to university and I was studying English and political science. And good university students, right? Like you may have your system, like in Germany, people go to gymnasium and you go on the university track. Probably the expectation is that I was going to be either a lawyer or a college professor or something like that. But I decided I just wanted some adventure. And so I enlisted in the Army, and I decided to go infantry and just do basic soldier stuff, and go to airborne school and do all the things that to me at the time were not really associated with what my lifestyle was like. I wanted adventure. And I never thought I would stay in to make it a career. I had dropped out of school. I entered the Army as a private first class, because I had college. But then I applied myself and did well. I was a good soldier. I liked soldiering, and then was able to go to university, was able to go to grad school, was able to live all over the world, was able to save money. And I think around the time that when I was a young lieutenant, captain taught me about investing. So I invested in the stock market early on, and I invested almost all of my disposable income into the market. And I did that since 1995. The reason why I say that I'm not really proud of it was you don't really know that you're a tool of the empire if you look at it that way, right? You don't know where you fit in historically into what your belief system will become. So, being a soldier, so I started to just have a bunch of questions that led to me having my moniker on X, which is the American exile. I really don't feel like I fit in anywhere, fit into any country, fit into any system. I've lived so much overseas that somebody once said, I think it was Colonel Doug McGregor, said that a senior NATO commander said to him that the United States isn't a country, it's a planet. And it's like it's just this separate entity from Europe when you look at how the United States thinks about things and thinks about the world. And when we look at, especially from the perspective uh, of Bitcoin, when most people arrive at this place where, and I did it well before that, philosophically, I had these misgivings much prior to finding Bitcoin. That's why Bitcoin made sense. It didn't take 1,000 hours. It didn't take 100 hours. It took reading the Bitcoin Standard. It took reading the bullish case for Bitcoin. And then, of course, you just start going down the rabbit hole and you read everything. But it instantly appealed to my sense that uh, when a nation state controls money, it controls resources, it controls everything. It controls freedom, it controls speech, it controls, and in our case in the United States, it controls the empire. And the empire isn't good. It's not a force for good. And so the fact that we have 800 bases overseas, that's, you heard the American national anthem, 5 o'clock every day, the base is 2 miles away. They blare it loud so that every person, every Japanese, maybe 20,000 Japanese people in the surrounding area get to listen to the U.S. national anthem at 5 o'clock every day, whether they like it or not. And I don't think that's a good look for the United States. And that's prior to Trump. And so Americans have, the way I see it, because I've been out of the country for so long, not all Americans, but many Americans have this sense that it's very Trumpian, that we can do whatever we want to do, that we're great. We're going to have these bases whether you like it or not. We're going to project force from those bases whether you like it or not. We're going to bomb people whether you like it or not. And for most, nice people who don't, the normal person that doesn't want to make any waves, it's not even put on the news. And that's what we do with our empire. And we've been doing it for, way before 1945. You could say 1898, after the Spanish-American War. The United States continually expanded. And I was having this discussion with my son. We homeschool. They're orange pilled. That's another, we can get to that discussion about, what's the future look like and what are the things that we can do in the future to mold the future. But the reason why I'm not, look, I had a great time in the Army, and I wouldn't change a thing because it made me who I am. But when we look at what our empire has become, it's not a force for good in the world, and I have misgivings about having been associated with it. Does that answer that question in a way?
100%. And I'm just curious, you said the empire. Do you mean the US government or like the whole construct? Like what do you mean by that?
Well, the United States is an empire, right? So however you want to construct it, and it's beyond the scope of the podcast. I don't want to give a history lesson, but and my son and I were discussing this. And so if we just do a really brief, quick timeline from the beginning of the United States, and then this is a question that I had that we can pose at the end of our discussion is like right now in the Bitcoin community, do we anticipate that we're going to go through an evolutionary change to a Bitcoin standard, or will there be revolutions, right? There'll be some sort of spark that requires unfavorable kinetic interactions, war, revolution to convert to a Bitcoin standard. In 1763, rather, if you had asked the average American who was British, right, they're a British colonist, the French and Indian War, 7 Years' War, had just ended. if you had asked the average colonist what they thought about the British Empire, they would have looked at you like you were foolish. They were just colonists, and they were in the colonies, um, and they had participated largely in militias in the French and Indian War. After the end of that war, the British Empire was looking to recoup on the financial losses that it undertook fighting France for 7 years in Europe. It was a global conflict, but in Europe and in the Americas. So that's where we get that whole timeline of the stamp tax and the coercive acts and all of those things that led up to what we call the American Revolution. Lexington conquered that battle in 1775 occurred 250 years and 2 days ago. And so we can learn a lot from that experience when the colonies were going through a transition where they would then break away from Great Britain and become a republic, right? So we went through this whole Republican democracy. We don't really have to talk about the evolution from the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution, but then very rapidly from that moment on, the United States started its expansion. So you went from 13 colonies, then we moved west and took whatever land we wanted from whoever was there and couldn't fight the fight. Michael Saylor talks in great deal about this, and you can look at it scientifically, germs, guns, and steel, that the superior technology allowed the settlers to move west and displace the natives. But it's the same thing that we do today all around the globe. And it doesn't make it morally or ethically defensible. So, but this idea that, so the United States is not this altruistic, unique republic that seeks to do good around the world. We never have been. And from our outset, and it's always, if you read, Murray Rothbard's Conceived in Liberty, something, again, that Saylor recommends, or Patrick Newman's Cronyism. And I think the first one was from the right from the beginning of the colonial settlement, the early 1600s through maybe the mid 1700s. I think he's written a part two. But this whole idea of the oligarchs of the time, the landed gentry, taking over the land as they moved west. And then 1803, we buy the Louisiana Purchase. We keep moving west, take whatever land we want. We eventually buy Alaska from Russia. That's why what I marked in 1898, United States fights the Spanish-American War. We get the Philippines, Guam, Puerto Rico. Later on we take, Hawaii for good measure. And so the United States has been on this progression of moving outward. Excuse me. So when the current narrative is that the U.S. saved Europe in 2 world wars, then nothing could be further from the truth, right? The European powers, and you're in Vienna.
Yes, I'm in Vienna.
So we could talk about that forever. Just the history, Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottomans laying siege, to Vienna, Napoleon conquered Vienna, the Russians, Suvorov, on their way to Paris. So these, these historical epics and all of those, especially Great Britain and France, had their global empires, and they maintained those global empires through the Second World War, right? The Netherlands were occupied, right? Austria went through the Anschluss, and and all of the European powers had extensive empires. And the United States was going to liberate Europe so that the Europeans could go back and take over their empires again. And in the United States, it's the same. Why does the United States fight Japan? It's really because we're in their neighborhood. We're in the Philippines, and we're competing over resources. So this idea that, and Patrick Buchanan wrote a great book called "A Republic, Not an Empire," controversial figure in American politics, but it's really proposes the theory that you can either be a republic or you can be an empire. And right now we are an empire because we have, we're on the dollar is the global reserve currency. We have 800 bases around the world. You see how we dictate trade policy, and it's not, by quiet quiet negotiation. It's through coercion, based on this idea that you can use force if you have to, because we're so used to doing it. And we no longer follow our Constitution, which says the Congress has to declare war. And we haven't declared a war since 1945. We went to Korea, we went to Vietnam, we went to the Middle East, everywhere, Grenada, Panama, Haiti, the Balkans. Those are the things that we know about. The United States is conducting military operations all over the globe all the time. And so when you live in that environment, and that's one of the things that as people who believe in a sound currency, that's why it's very hard for me to buy into notions like fix the money, fix the world.
Thank you for watching this video. This was only a snippet of the podcast. And if you want to watch the full episode and get all of the context of this episode, you can click right here or here. Oh, maybe also here.